Good evening, I'm George Solis. I'm on the Board of Trustees here at the library. And before I continue, I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements. Next week at this time, same place, 5:30 Tuesday, we're gonna have a hybrid event with Great Cranberry Isle summer resident and author Catherine Braven. And she'll be discussing her new book, Memoirs of a Mask Maker. It's a moving story of how a 5-year-old girl navigates deep loss after a tragic car accident leaves her motherless. And then that's not enough for you the next day. On Wednesday, 6 p.m., we're going to have an Acadia Ranger-led book group on Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods.
That's a good book.
Of course, these programs are all brought to you thanks to all of you who contribute to the library with your donations and volunteer work, and we greatly appreciate that. And before I forget, I want to thank Kate for doing the tech tonight. She'll be also facilitating online questions. And I'm going to introduce Carolyn Ball, who is the current chair of the SWH Select Board. And any of you who've ever served on a board for a small town will know that it is a difficult, time-consuming, and thankless job.
Amen.
When I was on a school board in Vermont, I would find myself avoiding people in the supermarket. I would be in the produce section and I'd see somebody I knew and I'd head down the toilet paper article so that I wasn't harassed by the tomatoes. It seemed to me at times that half the people loved me and the other half hated me. And I was just trying to do my job, like you and your other board members, but in a way to benefit the town and make the best decisions. But it's not easy, and I applaud Carolyn for the work that she's done. Now, I was pretty naive when I got on the school board, but Carolyn is a professor at the University of Southern Maine, Muskie School of Public Service, where she teaches about managing cities, towns, and counties. So she knows what she's talking about. And I heard this talk, a version of this talk last winter, and it was really good. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. I unfortunately can't stay, but I want to introduce Carolyn and thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just have a couple more days to be teaching. I'm teaching managing cities, towns, and counties, and I retire as of the end of August. So I'm going to start for that. I got to get this last one in. Yeah. So let me see. I know a couple of you are from Southwest Harbor, but the others, can you tell me where you're from? And so I'll add trivia if I can about where you're from compared to Maine. Can I start over here?
We got a place here in Southwest, but the other place we're from, there's lots of trivia, Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I hear a voice of sympathy there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And a few trials maybe taking place. Yeah. I don't know you, but you look familiar.
Jill Goldthwait by Harbor.
Yes. I've emailed you a number of times and you had great columns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm from Washington, D.C. also.
Oh, okay. I probably won't be talking about much of town government, about Washington, D.C. You know that some of it's controlled by Congress.
A lot of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Vivian Rutherford from Caldwell, New Jersey.
Okay.
Which, if you ever watched The Sopranos, that's where Tony Sopranos is. We're about 20 minutes from New York City.
Yes. You too?
Dana Mastriani. I'm originally from Peabody, Massachusetts, right next to Salem.
Yes. My ancestors.
Peabody or Salem?
Salem. Yeah, not too good. Guilty.
They're witches?
Yeah. Yeah, guilty. A whole family.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Well, one didn't make it. He didn't confess. And I talked to you a little bit before,
Yes.
so I know where you're from.
Yes, I'm Lou Zawislak. I
Mhm.
live in New Orleans. I summer here on MDI, and I'm originally from Eastport, Maine.
Mhm. Okay, and you might as well, we have some locals, but
I'm Ann Hall from Southwest Harbor. And I am the peer from Southwest.
yeah. So, if you, think about the Constitution, you'll start thinking, is there anything about local governments? And there's nothing, because we had local governments long before we had any thought of, a federal government in the United States. So, local governments are entities of the state and not entities of, the federal system that we have. And that's true of counties as well. Now, one of the first questions that I had as we were just chatting is, well, what's the difference between a city and a town? Well, there's not a difference. It's meaningless, except that towns started calling themselves cities and other towns called themselves towns. So in Maine, there's no difference between a city and a town. In other parts of the country, there is a difference based on the state law. If your town is over 5,000, it has these requirements, and if it's over a certain percent of its population, there are other requirements. So right away, nothing except that it's custom that that particular town, city of Ellsworth, city of Eastport are cities, but Ellsworth is 6,000. Any other place, we wouldn't consider that a city. So nothing, no difference. Now depending on where you live, there are also some other names for cities and towns, villages. And in New York, they do have villages that are what we would call towns. Here in New England, there's lots of villages, but they're usually part of another town. So Manson might be considered a village, but it's not a separate town. So you may have been in your community in a village, and it might have even had a post office. So it had some recognition as a particular place, but not as a town government or city government. So did anybody live in a village? If you're from Pennsylvania, you may have lived in a township. If you're in New Jersey, you may have lived in a township, and that would be the equivalent of a town here. So you have different names, but they essentially are doing the same thing, and they're not recognized in our federal constitution, which is really interesting. And so in other parts of the country, some of the things that I'll talk to you about tonight are handled by the county. There are New England states that don't even have counties. So if you know a little bit about Rhode Island, there are no counties. If you know a little bit about Connecticut, there are no counties. Now, if you look at a map, there are names of counties, but there's no government entity. So, so no one is taken to the county jail, for instance, if they're in Rhode Island, or to the county jail if they're in Connecticut. They don't exist. So when I moved out to the Midwest, I moved out to Illinois, and I majored in political science, but I had no idea of anything. And so coming from Connecticut, everything is really Connecticut, Southern Connecticut is there, Northern Connecticut, it's all kind of right there. And I remember having a beer with some friends, and this guy said he had to go work. He was working at the sheriff's office, and I thought that was a joke. I thought it was a joke because there are no sheriffs in Massachusetts except to run the jail. So the name sheriff still exists in Massachusetts, but it's strictly an administrator of the jail, and they are elected, and it's a political appointment. And you can imagine, if you are familiar with Boston politics and New England politics, that it's a pretty important job to have. It's kind of nice to have that, but it's strictly a political job that somebody runs for. And so there are little idiosyncrasies that you'll find that are different. Now, that means in New England, local communities, whether they're called cities or towns, are responsible for almost everything. So if you lived elsewhere, the county might be responsible for roads, for welfare, for libraries, and of course, deeds and those kinds of things, courthouses. And if you go out to the Midwest and you go to some of those square states, the county government seat will actually be in the middle. There'll be a courthouse right in the middle of town. If they're big enough, it's probably expanded beyond that. But you'd actually see the old county courthouse building in a big square. So there are no town greens, there's a town square, and that's where the county courthouse is. So counties also do handle some of the smallest areas. They're called unorganized territories in this state. And so they take care of plowing in these unorganized territories. So there are a few things that our counties do, but by and large, oop, how do I do that? Did I get it? No. Did I? Yep. Thanks, okay. So towns are a big deal, whether you're New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Maine. But Maine is in a unique situation where we have what's called strong home rule. That means the state defers to local governments, actually. And in the state law, it says that that should be liberally construed in favor of local governments. In other parts of the country, including parts of New England, which surprised me, I figured since we all started early, that all local governments would have strong local home rule, but that's not the case. It's actually written in our state law that the state defers to local government. If there's something that comes up that there's not a state law about, it defers to the government, to local government. Again, the reverse would be true if we were in another part of the country and even in New England. And I've already mentioned the very limited role that counties play. So you can imagine that anything that is deferred, we have to think about how much is that going to cost for us to do. The dilemma, though, is that our towns are very limited in their ability to tax. So property tax is the major way that we gain revenues for providing services. There are some excise taxes, some dog licenses, and there's some revenue sharing as well from state government. So we do receive some money from state government, but it's based on the population size and the wealth of the community. So here on Mount Desert Island, we would get proportionately less than an inland community of the same size. And then there are a few things where state government does have more control. And the one area that I'd mention is environmental issues. And it even goes so far as the state controls what's a junk car, a junk yard. And I presume that has to do with environmental issues, why we have a state law that talks about junk yards. And then more recently and controversially, the state is nudging and mandating consideration of workforce or affordable housing. And the state also nudges us too with resiliency grants. So right now we're all discussing how can we make our communities more resilient for coastal erosion, stormwater runoff, electrification, all the different things. And the state is nudging us to go in those areas by providing various kinds of grants. So a lot of us are competing against each other. And all of the communities here on the island are all involved in trying to obtain resiliency grants. It doesn't like me. It doesn't like me. I thought this was great. It is, I know. Think I did it? Oh, here. Okay, where's the mouse?
It's right there. It's working now, but I don't know why it's not working before. But there's that and the mouth.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yep. Another, I mentioned New England doesn't have counties, or Connecticut and Rhode Island don't have counties, and Massachusetts has very limited counties. Of course, you know that you have parishes in Louisiana, so we have a different situation even there. That's nice to hear. So the major form of government in.
Sorry, just
Okay.
helping this.
Does that do it? No, that doesn't do it. So the major form of government in Maine is the town manager, town meeting form of government. And so it's written in state law how to form your government. It doesn't, so it outlines what the town manager does, and the select board is responsible for hiring the town manager. There's a lot of concern about town management right now, not having enough town managers or persons that are going into that field. There's only one small program in the state to train them. So we try and raid some other states if we can to get town managers, or try and move up people in our governments that are taking other responsibilities. But it's not a clear, easy path. We don't have assistant managers since most of our towns are very small. So this is the classic case where there's a town manager and a select board. And that select board and the town manager establish the budget, which is the biggest responsibility of the town manager. And our local communities have budget or warrant committees that are volunteers. So you can volunteer to be on that, and you review the budget along with the select board reviewing the budget. So it's a separate meeting, and they meet 4 or 5 times to go over that budget. And they may ask questions of department heads to go over that. And so the next step in this form of government is to approve the warrant articles for town meeting. And that word warrant kind of confused me when I first moved to Maine. But if you watch English crime shows, they say, here's my warrant card. So it's making it official. So, so the select board would vote to make it official. And then at town meeting, and they happen anytime between May and June, depending on the community, then you vote on articles of the budget. And again, in New England, our schools are part of towns, and so this town owns the school over there. You'd also be voting on the school in this town. Now, it's a little bit confusing to me, but there's also an election as well. That's a secret ballot election, and there might be ordinances on the ballot. And in some places they call them bylaws. So there might be things that need to be approved by citizens. And very often they have to do with land use ordinances changes or harbor ordinance changes. So all of those things go on a secret ballot. And there's considerable difference between how many are attending town meeting versus how many vote, as you can imagine. So we had a huge crowd at our last town meeting. We had 143 people. We have about 1,600 voters, and we were absolutely thrilled. And do you know why we might have had what we considered a big town meeting?
And you do know.
The numbers?
Yeah,
There's a hundred.
yeah, controversy. So we had Chris's Pond. It's for summer residents. Down the street is a piece of property that the town owns, and a nonprofit called, now I've lost the name, Maine Coast Heritage Trust. Has purchased land around Chris's Pond to add to the pond, and so we have to decide whether we were going to accept it. So not only are you voting on the budget, but at town meeting, we were also voting on whether we would give the select board permission to determine where the boundaries would be on this gift. So you'd think, oh, can't you take a gift? Not really, not really. So one of the warrants that we have to vote on is whether we're willing to allow the select board to accept gifts. So you think, but no. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna try this by.
Yeah, but you just use those arrows.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't work. No, or not. Why?
Here,
Yeah, just put that in there.
so I just gave you the hint that, that town meetings are considerably smaller than the number of voters that might come out. And you know already that during presidential elections, even more people vote than at an off election. But there's some controversy about whether we should continue, and I'm not speaking of Southwest Harbor in particular. In general, in New England, there are fewer and fewer town meetings. In Arlington, and I think they may have just done away with this in Arlington, Massachusetts. It's a town of 50,000, and they voted for representatives to go to town meeting rather than the whole town going to town meeting. Representatives, and it was 250 people, if I recall correctly, that were chosen from precincts to be representatives at the town meeting. So even though it was a big town, they still wanted that concept of town meeting. Gray, Maine, which is kind of middle Maine. After COVID, we all went to the ballot with our warrant articles about how much we would spend, or raise rather, it's raise taxes. And they decided to do away with their town meeting. So there's a process to do it. They can't just, the select board can't just say, let's do away with it. But so there's a trend to do away with it in favor of having your select board, and I'll talk about what that happens. We change the name usually if we go to eliminating the town meeting. What do you think? Should we?
No. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the populist democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't get most of the people,
Yeah.
so it isn't. But just people who are engaged. Well, that's interesting.
And
The other
sometimes-
ones live in town too.
Mhm.
I mean, every year for years, it's been fewer and fewer and fewer till we had controversy.
Yeah. Controversy does
We've
it.
had town meetings with 85 people
Mhm.
voting for the whole town,
Mhm.
including the budget, and that just seems wrong to me.
But if you're here in May, that's when we vote. If you're here in May, even if you're not a member, you're not a voter here, you can come visit and watch it. It's kind of interesting to see what happens. And you'll go, I don't understand what's going on. It takes a little bit.
And I would say, I think previously when we had town meeting at the fire station, there was a lot of people, so it also might be our residents like fire trucks more than school
Yeah.
gymnasium, so.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
The question, go ahead.
How many town meetings do you have a year?
One.
Oh. wow.
Yeah, it's just one.
And one.
So,
Okay.
and perhaps I didn't explain, so it's to raise the funds. And then, and so you agree to be taxed. And then from there, the select board then determines how that will be used, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So,
My issue with town meeting, or one of the issues with town meeting,
yeah,
is that I've heard too many people say, I would have voted differently if it were a secret ballot, but if I have to raise my hand,
Okay.
and my neighbors have to watch
Yeah.
me say that I don't wanna fund the library, for example, or the school,
right,
whatever, I can't do it, I
Right.
won't do it, and I can
Yep.
easily say, I've talked to as many as 20 people at a town meeting who said that, they will not,
yeah. Well,
Can't do it publicly. They won't.
for Chris's Pond, again, I hope that you will go down and visit it. I raised it at a select board meeting, whether we should go for secret ballot with Chris's Pond, because it was controversial. There were people opposed to Chris's Pond and accepting the land. In the previous year, we had gotten a vote to actually authorize us to apply for the grant, but it didn't happen. But in any event, so I raised the question, shall we put that on the secret ballot? And yeah, we could have, but the individuals who were not favorable to Chris's Pond didn't care. So I didn't feel it was up to me to put it on, ask for a secret ballot. And what would happen is that it's a meeting, although, so it's a meeting and a person could get up and say, I'd like to have a secret ballot.
You can,
Good,
town meeting,
yeah, I checked.
and then what? Just one person can say it, and that's it?
Well, it'd have to be second.
It has to be seconded?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big issue.
Yeah, you may need a majority vote though, at
Yeah.
that point.
Right, then you need a majority vote. That was a big issue back in, when we were on the warrant committee about the schools.
Mhm.
And people saying, I can't publicly vote, I'm afraid to.
Come to the.
And I was told I'd have my tires slashed, seriously, in this town.
Yeah, but again, it could happen, but, and I broached it, but there wasn't the support from those that were more negative towards Chris's Pond. So, okay, so let's say, as I said, Gray Maine, decided that, they would not have, a town meeting anymore, that it was successful just having it on a ballot. So towns have an alternative too, and most of you have heard the term town council or city council, because we watch enough TV that we see that, or maybe our towns have the name city council or town council. And so to establish an alternative, then what towns do is they form a charter and a charter committee, and they determine what they want the town council to have responsibilities for, what they want the town manager to have responsibilities for, how they want to establish their committees, when they're going to hold their elections. So there's a variety of things that go into establishing a charter. And usually when they change to a charter, then there's a town, they change the name to town or city council. Sometimes they also change the name of the city manager to, rather than manager, sometimes they change it to administrator. It's to distinguish it, but largely the responsibilities are very similar. It's the specifics that are taking place in the charter. And are you still working on a charter?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Well, we've
Revising it?
always.
Yeah.
We revised the charter a couple of years ago, but I think they're forming a charter commission now.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's Bar Harbor?
Yes.
Yeah, Bar Harbor. Yeah. So there are a variety of different ways that they're set up. And so Bar Harbor happens to have a hybrid system. So they have a town council, but they also have a town meeting. And more typically, you'd have a town council, a city manager, and you would not have a town meeting. So that's an unusual one. And it's kind of interesting to see how they handle it.
Which one wins, so to speak, or who has, is the town meeting vote
Yes.
beyond, that goes no matter what a town council
Yeah.
votes?
It's they have a hybrid system, so they call it a town council and they establish the rules for how Bar Harbor will be governed in the charter. But the town meeting is to see what sum the townspeople will raise for the school, for the public works, so it's the same idea.
And whatever happens in the town meeting can't be overridden by the town council?
Right, right. Now, in a town council, and most of you are familiar with town council probably, city council, in Washington DC. Yeah. Then the alternative is that the city or town council then actually establishes with the town manager the budget, and they hold public hearings, and then they vote on the budget. So it's all done by, some would say, a more professional method. Then there's a third, and again, there are varieties of this, but these are the 2 or 3 that are most common. There's a mayor and a council. And here in Maine, the mayor usually is first among equals. That mayor is voted for by the town council members, and so doesn't have a lot of authority and is largely ceremonial. But that person does have the title of mayor, so they would run the meetings. They would work on the agenda with the town manager, just as the chair of the select board would. Do you have anything you want to add to the Bar Harbor hybrid?
No, that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
We have a council with the chairman, just exactly as you say, who runs the meetings and so on, but does not have any individual authority.
Right.
And so then we have a manager that does
Mhm.
the administrative side.
Where we are, the mayor is elected separately from the councilmen and women,
Yep,
and he has a lot of power
yeah,
running meetings, but also determining some of the committee appointees.
Yes.
Like that.
yes, and that would be a typical mayor form. But New England established the town manager form of government during the progressive era, and it really took off, and so it's pretty much complete. And even in our big city, Boston, they actually have a city manager as well as the mayor. So the mayor is the person that goes to all the parades, and everybody knows that person. And they do have authority, but the day-to-day management of Boston actually is a city manager. So that progressive movement even took forward in our biggest city, Boston. Another thing, no, it doesn't. I was gonna say one more thing about Boston, that again, the mayor takes a role in anything that's going on in the various neighborhood, villages. So that's the person that would be invited to any ceremonies. So although I called our mayors, that we have a few of our mayors ceremonial, that is a good deal of the Boston City Mayor's responsibility as well. Okay. So that town manager is responsible for the day-to-day operations. And it wouldn't matter whether they're called a town administrator or a city manager, essentially the day-to-day operations. And they do the hiring of employees. So when we when we needed a new police chief, I served on the committee that looked at it, because I said, I want to, it didn't necessarily have to be me, it could have been somebody else on the select board, but I'm interested in community policing, and I want to ask community policing questions, so I'm going, I want to. And thank goodness we have a police chief who's very interested in community policing. So the town manager is actually the person that hires the police chief and the other persons that work for a town. And most of our towns are very, very stripped down. There aren't a lot of positions. So what that budget has put forward to the public, that's it, unless we get a gift. And that gift goes for something specific. And very often it's the fire department that gets a gift for an emergency situation. And another big responsibility is advising the board or the council. So day to day, they offer their advice in our meetings. And it's a really tough job because sometimes the select board or the council will reject it. And that's what they're there to do, to recommend. And occasionally something will become controversial and that will make the paper that there is a difference, but usually not. Because they truly are the people that recommend. It's a really hard job. I'm sure that many of them feel as though I need to say my stand. If the board or council rejects it, that's their job, to be managing the day-to-day operations. And preparing the budget, I think I've said enough of that. Okay. So, a visitor, I wish you were here, a visitor came up to us during our select board meeting. And he asked, were we gonna talk about cemeteries? And he had misunderstood that perhaps there was gonna be a discussion about cemeteries. And he was concerned that, the cemeteries hadn't been kept up. And there is a cemetery committee and it's all volunteers. We set aside a certain amount of money for cemetery upkeep. But beyond that, it goes to the next year and the next year and the next year. So there's a limited amount for each kind of department, including how we keep up the cemeteries. And we might establish what's called a reserve account for cemetery upkeep. And if they've used up the money this year, then any kinds of things that they want to do will be postponed to the year after. We have emergency repair accounts in the reserve accounts, and we have a gift account. We discovered that not only is it the fire department that gets gifts, but the police department has been given gifts. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that. And then another part of the budget is what's called the capital improvement program. So you've seen the road beyond here. Has everybody gone beyond the library? Yeah. That's what goes into a capital improvement program. So we set aside monies each year, and by us, I mean the public will set aside at town meeting an amount that the select board and the warrant committee recommend each year. And knowing that we're not gonna be expending all that money based on what we raise, we're going to get grants from the DOT to spend on that. And we're also going to get, there's something else we're gonna get, lost it. Oh, we're gonna float a bond. So we're gonna pay for that over time, but we're gonna have those particular aspects in what we call a capital improvement program. It's just another part of the budget. So those of us who live on the island, we expend a fair amount of money on our various docks. And so they need repair regularly, but if we're gonna expend, we're gonna save over time. Now, this past year, did anybody get a raise this past year? Did anybody? Uh-oh. Was it a fairly sizable increase? Sort of.
Unfair question.
I know, this is really hard. We have the director here and
It's never
an
enough.
employee. This is really tough. So, about time for budget, which is January, February, we're starting to work on budget. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, was approximately 5.9%. And it looks at New England. You can look at New England, of course, you can look at the whole country as well, but we look at New England. And so we discovered that inflation had been high the previous year, and it had been about 5.9%. And this may be 6% it got to last year, this past year. And so as we're going through the capital improvement program, we're thinking, should we ask the voters to set aside $10,000 or $20,000, knowing that this is really not going to be particularly invested in anything with high yields, should we reduce the amount we raise this year and wait till inflation goes down? And we decided to do so. So the town manager recommended, well, various amounts. And we went through and said, no, not this year, no, not this year. So we reduced the amount. Good idea or not?
Have a lot of deferred maintenance then, and then that comes back to bite you at some point.
Yeah, and most of that would be in our reserve account, but yes, there could be some maintenance that is not covered, and it would be related to our docks probably, where suddenly we need something that we're trying to save over time for it. But the maintenance would come in the regular budget and in our reserve account if there's something like emergency repair, and we also have a tree fund. There are different kinds of reserve accounts, so we didn't have quite that problem. Other thoughts? No?
Because I'm from Massachusetts and still have a lot of connections there, and public library funding is being cut right and left.
Yes.
And so they are losing, I mean, just because there's not enough money to go around for everything that the towns need.
Right.
And one, an easy, funnily enough, an easy target in a sense is the library because of the internet, et cetera,
Right, they're not.
They cut it in the town I came from, saying the students don't need it because they all have the internet and there's a
Right.
library in the school.
Right.
Boom,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
goes the library.
I'm a former library director in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And
Oops, be careful what you say.
So Massachusetts is different than Maine, obviously, in terms of population, and I think a lot of the libraries that started in Maine, if you notice, we have what, 2,200 people here, tops. 1,704, right, so I think it makes it very difficult to raise the type of money that it takes for a library to run properly with that few number of people, and so I think it's based on just sheer numbers to some extent. Although I think the usage of libraries has gone up significantly in the last, certainly 25 years, where I always say it's not your mother's library anymore. People
Right.
come in and using
Right.
it differently. But back to libraries being cut in Massachusetts, there's also a Massachusetts Library Commission, which oversees the public libraries in Massachusetts. And about 15 years ago, because libraries were being cut more drastically than other departments, they actually had legislation passed that said the library cannot be cut any more than
Really?
any other department, because the library and the recreation departments were the ones that were taking the
Sure.
cut. So if you wanna cut the library 5%, you also have to cut every other town department by 5%. It has to be the same. So,
Yeah.
that's interesting. A
So,
little diversion,
no,
but,
no, no,
but there is a lot of, support in Massachusetts for libraries. It's obviously a more affluent area too, just by the sheer number of people.
Sure.
And remember, you have all those colleges and.
Right.
So.
right,
But I also think it's important to note something that you said, that libraries today aren't your mother's libraries.
Right.
They're very, very different. So people might say, okay, the school has a library, you have internet, so cut the library, the town library. But the town library is offering different services than it ever used to.
30 years ago, you didn't see, for example, the programming, much like tonight, that you see in libraries, and libraries really have become the central hub of many towns. So it's the focal point, and especially if there's no senior center or no community center, it's sort of the de facto center of the town.
right, and our library is right here in the center of town, and so is in our recreation center, right in the center of town, so they're very visible. When we talk about nonprofit funding, I will tell you that there have been controversies. Some people have, we're gonna give the same amount, can't they get by on their own? So there have been periodic controversies at town meeting, and that makes everybody get up and get excited. So it hasn't happened recently for Harbor House or for the library, but it has happened in the past. It's a significant amount of nonprofit funding. I believe it's 200,000. So when you're thinking about your budget and thinking about, well, is there something that we can cut? There's all these very worthwhile nonprofits that the town is funding. There are heating, food, as I said, recreation, library are the big ones. Our emergency management services is a nonprofit. So there's significant funding that goes to nonprofits through the property taxpayer. And here we also, whereas in other parts of the country, your county might take the assessed value and determine how much you're going to pay in property taxes. Here in New England, the school is part of the town, and the county tells us how much they need, and so that all becomes part of your property tax bill. There's one other final thing that I want to mention about the budget, and this is a little bit of trivia. You've heard the word surplus, and we all know, oh, there's a surplus. And it's called an unassigned fund balance. So took a long time to figure it out when I first moved here. So there's the budget, and sometimes we actually have something left over. And if you work for another entity, oh, you've got a surplus, and you went and spent it all and tried to get it down to zero as close as you could by buying whatever equipment you needed. Well, it doesn't work that way because each of those particular categories and departments are separate. So if I have, if I didn't use my money here in this department, it can't go to another department, for example. And the leftover goes into what's called the unassigned fund balance. Now, if it turns out that something went over budget, then the select board can vote to take money from the unassigned fund balance to rectify it. And once it's in the unassigned fund balance, it's not used. It's there in case of an emergency, or if we decided that, yes, our taxes have gone up significantly and we want to reduce our taxes, the select board would have to vote to use the unassigned fund balance. So it's a cushion, and it's not used for the most part. This past year, we decided as a select board to fund LED lighting. It was 97,000, not a lot of money, 97,000 to convert our lighting to LED. And so we decided, the company said, oh, well, you could pay for this over time. And we thought 97,000, let's vote to take it out of the unassigned fund balance. So that is done very judiciously. This happened during the year after the budget was passed. And so we discussed whether we wanted to do that. Right now, we have about 17% of our budget in unassigned fund balance. I talked to the town manager, city manager, because he is in South Portland. He told me they have 6%, but we've always been told we should have 18, 17, 20%. So we have certainly enough for a cushion and to make decisions such as making a decision to have LED lighting paid for in one fell swoop. So that's quite a bit of trivia for you there. Sorry about that part, but okay. So summer residents, you can come to our select board meetings. We're on Zoom. When COVID happened, most places went on Zoom, and we voted as a select board to continue. I think it's really important. I hear some grumbling sometimes that they don't want to spend the money to have it on Zoom. I think it's $10,000 a year to have Zoom. I think it has allowed people to participate and, more importantly, see what's going on. And it's very helpful for people in February. Very helpful for people in January. Yeah, maybe you can come to our meetings in July and August, but you're busy, aren't you, in July and August? Yeah, but you can ask a question. It's harder on Zoom to ask a question. Because we have to notice you. So it is, so if you had a real strong issue that you wanted to bring up, it's probably easier to come to the meeting. So a select board or a town council is considered a legislative body. So there are different rules in different towns about when to allow citizens to speak or even to allow citizens to speak. So think of Congress, no one's getting up and raising their hand from the gallery and saying, I'd like to ask a question. Well, we're small, and so in this town, during the meeting, if a person has a question, we answer it then. Some communities decide at the beginning of the meeting that they will take questions from citizens about other things not on the agenda. And then there are other towns that at the end of the meeting, they ask whether citizens have a question. But by and large, in this particular community, we stick with the agenda, and when we get off, somebody tells us we shouldn't have done that. So we stick with the agenda, so if somebody raises something that needs to be considered, it would go on the next meeting. And I think you're arguing about right now, when to have
argument about it.
citizens talk.
We now have 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting where any citizen may speak on anything as long as it is not on the agenda for that night. And it is not, a lawsuit, that's the kind of at that point. And we limit each speaker to 3 minutes. I don't know that we've ever used the 15 minutes, but the conversation now is, if you're restricting it to things that aren't on the agenda, why do people, I mean, people do raise issues.
Yeah,
That's a good thing.
And this person that raised the cemetery issue,
Yeah,
we couldn't talk to him really about it, except to say, I'll talk to you after the meeting and give you the name of the cemetery committee
Right.
chair.
right. But now there are proposals everywhere from allowing public comment on any agenda item or shifting the whole thing to the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
Which actually, although it's not intended that way,
It
for
would-
meetings that run 3 and 4 hours, you're not gonna have many people still standing by the time you get to that
Right.
final agenda item.
Right.
So it's a difficult subject.
Yeah.
The concern being, people who have not come to the meeting don't have any notice about what issues those other commenters are gonna raise.
Right.
And therefore, if you get into a council discussion with a person about an issue, other people who might have wanted to be there for that discussion.
Right, then it's not on the agenda.
So,
Right, yeah.
it's a complicated matter,
Yeah.
it's not just a simple, well, why shouldn't people be able to
Yeah.
talk?
Do those of you from other places have any feeling about citizens talking at meetings or?
Yeah, we always have 2 times during our council meetings. Sounds kind of similar. The first time you can just comment on it, not anything on the agenda, but anything you want to bring up. But then after we go through most of the agenda, then there's another period of time where there can be discussion on the different parts of the agenda. And it gets pretty heated, where people shout and have to gavel to
Sure.
silence. But, yeah.
And it's very tough since we don't have a rule, a policy, I should say, policy would be the appropriate word. It's hard to determine sometimes, okay, we're gonna stop questions and continue on with the vote. Usually there's a vote, yeah. So, yeah, ask questions. If you're here in May, it is fun to attend a town meeting. If you lived in Lucerne, Maine, anybody have property in Lucerne, Maine? It's as you're going out 1A towards Bangor. They're having a town meeting this week, I believe, and how should I say that? Property taxpayers can vote in Lucerne and Maine. even if they own property in Massachusetts. It's a summer residential area, and they had a special bill at some point through the state legislature. There's 3 or 4 towns that do this. And so they hold it in the summer so that any property owner can participate in town meeting. In reality, they do pass a budget, but Dedham, which is the nearby town, manages their day-to-day responsibilities. So that is a little bit different. There aren't very many places, I think 3 or 4.
Can we do that? I mean, it.
Probably.
Would do that?
Probably.
Because I was gonna ask about, all the people who own property here who are
Yes.
residents, and
Yes.
have no say
Yes.
whatsoever in
Yes,
the town.
it is a dilemma.
It's a huge dilemma, but
Yeah.
they pay, I mean.
Yeah, and it would take a
Doesn't
special
seem fair.
bill, and it would take
A special bill
in the state legislature.
to allow it for a town.
Yeah,
So then why can the CERN do it?
they did a long time ago,
Oh,
not recently. Yeah, because they were, again, a summer colony.
Yeah.
And
There's
so,
also a thing called the private and special law,
Yeah.
so you could do it
You
for
could do it.
one particular town.
yeah,
And it wouldn't apply to every town.
Right. right, and I think,
I mean, one wonders what would be going on in a number of these towns if all property residents could vote at town meeting,
yeah.
all
Yeah.
property holders could vote
Yeah.
at town meeting. Might be
Well-
very different here.
And then the counter argument is then what stake do those property owners who are not residents and not voters have in things like the schools?
School.
And if their only interest was their property ownership, why would they not want to keep those property taxes
Right.
as low as possible?
Right.
Making it difficult to run year-round services.
yeah, yeah.
Can you kind of share where would referendums go then
Oh, okay.
for a town?
Oh, well, you see the little.
Yeah,
I can't recall, what town that is in Southern Maine, but obviously they had a referendum and they had two different bills. With different wording, I believe, so that caused problems. And yes, I can't tell you the details. It's possible for citizens to bring forth by petition something to go on to the ballot.
That's how we just had that cruise ship referendum.
Yes.
What weight does a referendum carry?
It's
It's
a law.
totally, if it passes, that's the will of the voter.
It's the law.
If we weren't
That's
being
law.
sued right now, we
Right.
would have to implement that referendum. But because of the lawsuit, we have suspended implementation until the lawsuit is decided.
Was it the town council that suspended implementation or a court?
Technically, yes, it was the council who said, we're just not gonna implement this. We do have an agreement with the cruise ship industry that reduces visitation by 30% for this year. And we said we're gonna implement that agreement with some reduction. But we don't wanna go through turning the whole town upside down trying to implement the referendum if the courts say it's unconstitutional.
And this is going to federal court, so this is a little bit different than other kinds of disagreements that need to go to the court, because they're raising a constitutional issue.
But if I could, it's not necessarily a disagreement. It's something that a citizen wants to see happen. And it is a route to make that happen outside of the community government if they feel the community isn't taking it up or addressing it. So you can do that at the state level, and there are 8 referenda on the ballot in November
Right.
at the state level.
Right.
Or you can do it at a community level, and there are rules about you have to get petitions signed, they have to be
Right.
certified signatures, there are time limits, you have to get them in, etc. And then the legislative body, either the state legislature or the town body, may pass the referendum if they choose to, once it's been voted. But if they don't, then it must go to a public vote.
Interesting.
So if you want to get involved too, there are all sorts of task force and committees. We don't have one now on resiliency or sustainability, but lots of towns have committees with that kind of name. We have a waste reduction task force, not very sexy name for it, but really important. So there's lots of committees you can, be a member of. Obviously, if you're a summer resident, you're gonna be leaving. But if there's something that you want to have happen or do, such as the gentleman who wanted to, have more work done on the cemeteries, there's a committee for that.
What, so a non-voter can be on any committee?
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
I think that's not widely understood.
It was the first time it has happened, as far as I know here, when, a person joined the comprehensive plan update. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I chaired the comprehensive
Yep.
plan update,
Mhm.
and we had a summer resident
Mhm.
who was invaluable. to the committee.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a delight to have a summer resident participate, because we got a different perspective. But at the same time, he brought some expertise that we didn't have locally, so it was very helpful.
And, the committees are recommendation committees, so he couldn't be on the planning board, for example, where they're voting. But other committees certainly, yeah. Attending, in the winter, budget workshops, meetings on proposed ordinances. So there's lots of different ways that you might, be involved. Yeah.
The harbor committee is an example, because we have a lot of summer residents who use the harbor and who have sailboats or boats of one kind or another. And they're underrepresented, and it would be lovely to have them come and provide their perspective to the harbor committee, so we have a more balanced view of both the commercial fishermen and the people who use the harbor for financial reasons, and then the people who use it for recreational purposes. And a lot of the summer people would fall into that
Yes.
category, and so we would welcome visitors and comments.
I'm gonna end it here. It's 6:38 and we were to be over at 6:30, so I could talk long, but I'm gonna end it here.
Can I ask a
Nancy?
question?
Yeah, sure.
This is sort of that weird. Is it okay
Oh,
for citizens, to speak to elected representatives, you, for instance? I mean, in other words, could I?
So you meet me on the street?
Right, I meet you on the street, or we sit down and have a cup of coffee,
Okay.
or whatever.
Yes,
Can I talk to you about will you talk to me?
yes.
What you feel is important in the town, or the way you look at certain things, et cetera, et cetera. Can I,
Yes, you
get
can,
your opinion on,
because,
could I have asked you how you feel about Chris's Pond?
yes, but I'm elected to represent your opinion.
No,
But,
I
yes,
understand, but I have to vote for you
Uh-huh.
or anybody else there, so
Yeah.
I wanna know what you think.
Yeah, what can't be done is, you can't talk to 2 or 3 of us together.
Together,
Then it's considered a meeting and it's violating how we represent you.
but I could call each one up
Sure.
individually,
Yeah, or nowadays email.
yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep, and my phone number's on my email, and people say, what's your phone number? And I say, it's down the bottom. It's down the bottom. Yeah,
Something that you've mentioned, but I'm not quite sure I know the relationship of bylaws to the charter.
okay, in this state, we call them ordinances, so, the charter doesn't have, ordinances in it. It tells how, the town is going to pass particular ordinances. It tells how the town is gonna run elections. It tells how, the town manager is gonna work, what responsibilities are. So it's a whole series of ways of managing the town.
That's the charter.
Yeah, and so this particular town doesn't have a charter. So what we go by is, what does the state law say the town is responsible for? And what is the responsibility of the town manager? Because the default form of government is town manager, select board, town meeting. So that's written out, and if a town chooses to do something different, which they can, then they form a charter committee, and how that's formed is written out in state law. And they may make some changes, usually, the town has become large enough very often that they don't want to go have a town meeting. Or something has come up that is not working well. And they need to make a modification to the charter. That also happens after they've got a charter.
And so are you saying that ordinances and bylaws are used interchangeably?
No, yeah, we don't use the word bylaws in the state,
We use-
ordinances, but
Okay.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Okay.
So those are your parking law. That's an example that we all know about parking. What does the town say about parking? So there's an ordinance, or in some parts of the country, bylaws. I think in Massachusetts, they use
Yeah,
bylaws,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I listen to Canadian TV and they use bylaws too. Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
So anything that we're gonna pass, becomes an ordinance. And so there's a shoreline ordinance, there's a harbor ordinance, there's a parking ordinance. There are a number of different ordinances.
Thank you.
Did you?
I was just gonna comment about ordinances. in the
Okay.
harbor. The harbor committee does have ordinances, and we are an advisory committee to the select board. And we every year look at those and see how best to keep the harbor safe and working well. And then we make changes and recommendations to the ordinances, and then they come to the select board for their approval, and if they approve it, then it goes on to the town meeting for the town. And so those are the steps that we use for the ordinances from an advisory committee.
Yeah, so if we're a town council form, the town council would pass an ordinance. So Maine was very active. We had young people here in Mount Desert Island that wanted to do away with plastic bags. And so they came to the various town council, select board, and made a presentation. And then an ordinance was developed, and I think the kids did it, actually. And then the select board or the town council would approve, and then when town meeting occurs, at the written ballot, we voted to approve the banning of plastic bags. It was polystyrene, I think, too. Yeah. Yeah, so bylaws the same.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready to go?
Mrs. Norwood at the school.
Yeah.
Her class did that, getting rid of the
Yes.
paper bags.
And they did it all over. I mean, they did it
Yes, I mean,
for every
it's one
town.
word, I didn't hear, but thanks for your comments.